What's happening YouTube? Today I want to talk about why I bought a Fuji XT-2 instead of an XT-3. And the short answer here is that if you're debating between the two, the only way the XT-2 offers more value for money than the XT-3 is if you buy it used, because the XT-2 is about the same price, if not more expensive than a new XT-3, except from when you're buying it used. A used XT-2 versus a new XT-3, I think the XT-2 still offers a pretty good value for money. So let's talk about it a bit more. Now first of all, the motivation for buying a Fuji camera in the first place over a Sony or Panasonic or anything else was that I wanted a smaller camera system that I could take with me when I'm traveling, when I'm just walking the streets, and something that also might be able to replace my larger DSLRs in the future with something that's smaller and lighter and still does a good job. The first thing that I would consider is why wouldn't I want to buy the newer model, because it should be updated from the older model and do more things and better things and do everything better than the old one does. Now I did look at the XT3, and while it does do a lot of things better than the XT2, it looked to me like the XT2 still does most of the things that I need it to do to a very high standard, which made it not really worth spending the extra money on the XT3 for things that I didn't really need it to do. So one of the main things that I've always wanted in a camera that I've never really had, except from back in the day when I had a Canon T5, was a proper flip out screen. And neither the XT2 or the XT3 have that, and none of my professional DSLRs have that either. So for the first instance, the XT3 wasn't selling me on that. Maybe if it had had that and there was a potential for me using it for video as well, it might have tipped the scale a little bit. But to be honest, I'm not having that much trouble using the DSLR for video right now, so maybe I would still have stuck with the XT2. But anyways, the XT3 doesn't have that, so I'm not inclined to spend more money on it. In terms of cost, a new XT3 was about 1,500 bucks. It was maybe 1,400 at the time, it was on sale. And a used XT2 was about 700, maybe 800 bucks, depending on where you buy it used from. So saving that sort of $700, maybe $800 on the camera leaves me lots of room to buy a couple lenses for it instead of just having a new camera and no lenses. The next thing I was thinking about was the image quality. Coming from a full frame DSLR system, I was a little bit worried that maybe a crop sensor camera wouldn't be able to cut it, but from everything that I've been hearing, the XT2 has really good image quality for a 24 megapixel crop sensor, and the XT3 does even better than that with 26 megapixels, but you don't notice a big difference in them really. There is better low light performance with the XT3, but the XT2 isn't really that bad either. And because again, I'm not currently using this professionally, I was slightly less worried about having a slightly lower level of image quality. And generally, I haven't really noticed much difference in image quality, even compared to my DSLRs, except from that different depth of field. And I do notice it there, but not so much that it makes me really disappointed to use the crop sensor. The autofocus. Again, the XT3 has improvements in autofocus and it's generally much faster and snappier than the XT2. But I have seen professional wedding photographers who use the XT2 and they don't have too much trouble with it, and a lot of the time with weddings you're shooting in low light. So I figured the XT2 probably does a good enough job in that department as well. And since I've had it, I've only had a couple instances where it's been hunting with autofocus, and honestly it was the kind of environment where probably my Canon 5D Mark IV would have been struggling similarly as well. Now focus points. The XT3 has more focus points than the XT2, but the XT2 has more focus points than my Canon 5D Mark IV. So moving up to something with as many focus points as this felt like a pretty big change, and it seems like the sensor is almost completely covered to me. It's not, but it's how it feels compared to the 5D Mark IV. So that was a step up, and I have no issues with how many focus points are on this camera. And also with the eye autofocus, apparently it works much better on the XT3. I found it works fine on the XT2 as well, but I don't really use it that much either, so XT2 kind of wins there again. I don't need eye focus, so I'm not going to pay the extra for the better version. The EVF. The XT2 has 2.6 million pixel EVF, and the XT3 has like 3.5 million. So the XT3 has a way better EVF. I do find that looking through it, generally everything looks fine, but I don't get a good feeling of how the image is really going to look until I'm back home and on the computer, or sometimes you can see it a little bit better on the back of the screen. But I feel like that happens even with DSLRs. When you're looking at the back of your camera, you don't always know if the picture is going to look as good until it's on the computer and you can really mess around with it. So I'm kind of fine with the XT2 not having as good of an EVF, but I wouldn't say it was a bad EVF at all. I don't really think that it hinders my ability to take pictures. And I can usually tell if it's going to be a nice picture or not. Just sometimes I get home and the picture looks better than I thought it was gonna. The LCD screen. They both seem to have about the same LCD screen. Maybe some build quality improvements on the XT3, but the XT2's is fine. No real problems with it. I wish that one of them flipped out sideways like that for like video talking to the camera. But for photography, I actually prefer it the way it is. So you can just shoot like that in the street and you can get the camera down low, or you can tilt it like that and you don't have to have this thing sticking out here, being a bit more conspicuous. So yeah, just whatever you prefer in that department. They did add a touch screen capability to the XT3, which the XT2 doesn't have, and basically all new cameras should have a good touch screen at this point, but I can live without it. I really like it on the 5D Mark IV. It makes it feel a lot more modern and nicer to use than the 5D Mark III in my opinion, but I can live without it on the XT2. It's not, I don't need it that desperately. I can still get by with the old school D-pad and focus buttons and stuff. Does that make sense? Alright, usability and ergonomics. Both cameras are laid out pretty much the same. The XT2 does have some like minor ergonomic changes, so it feels slightly different to hold, but not by much. I like the old dials sometimes, but sometimes I don't want to use the old dials, so I like the fact that both cameras have got plenty of customizable buttons, so you can take the ISO and the shutter speed and attach it to these dials on the front and the back, so you get more of that sort of modern feel when you're using manual mode. And I like where the focus buttons are. Everything sort of just fits well for my hands. It is kind of a different learning curve moving from Canon to Fuji to figure out where all the buttons are, but once you get used to it and you develop that muscle memory, it's pretty good. So yeah, so no significant changes enough there to make me want to get the XT3. Now for video, if you're a serious video shooter, I should have probably mentioned this at the start, this isn't really the place that is going to get you good advice on video shooting. I shoot video for YouTube and that's pretty much it, to be honest. I don't make any money from video shooting, so I'm not the best person to talk about this. So if you're shooting just for YouTube or for fun and you don't really make any money from shooting video, the XT2 shoots fine. The video's fine. There's probably lots of better options out there for video at maybe a similar price range as well, but I have no problems with all of the video modes that are on here. It shoots slow motion 1080p at 120 frames per second. It does have some like problems in that like, yeah, what's it called? Aliasing. It has a bit of that, you do see it, but it's fine for YouTube if you're not making money off it. It's not that big of a deal really. I do personally think that the Canon camera that I have at least puts out a nicer 1080 picture, 1080 24 frames per second picture So that's why I use it for these like talking head videos. The Fuji tends to look a little bit weird. You have to pick the picture profiles. It does have F-Log, which the Canon doesn't have. So if you want to grade your pictures, it's probably better than the Canon 5D, but I'm not grading pictures, it's just coming straight out of camera and I'm editing the video that way. So in that sense, I know nothing about videos, but this can do everything I need it to do. But this just does it nicer for me. I feel like I'm losing it. I'm losing it here. I don't know if this is gonna pan out, this part of the video. The Fuji does shoot in 4K, and apparently it does pretty well in 4K. Again, the XT3 does all of these things better, but I mean, I haven't even shot this thing in 4K. I always shoot with 1080, so I really don't care that it shoots 4K. I would stick with the XT2 for video for my kind of purposes anyways. Autofocus is fine. It's not as good as the Canon. Again, it's a little bit slower, maybe a little bit more jittery or something. It's just not as solid of an autofocus system, but it would do. If I didn't have this, I would be quite happily using this with the kit lens to shoot video. And I think that's about everything. So basically what it boils down to is it's a small camera. It wasn't that expensive compared to the newer models. The newer models aren't offering that much more that I need to make great pictures, and I've seen plenty of photographers that I respect making awesome images with the Fuji X-T2. So hopefully that helps. If you're in this situation, hopefully it helps you make a decision. And thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please feel free to drop me a comment if you have any other questions. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.